Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jayam Vishnupad Paramahansa Paravajakacharya Stotaris of the Srishiman's Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki ISKCON BBD Founder Charya Srila Prabhupada Ki Jayam Vishnupad Paramahansa Paravajakacharya Stotaris of the Srishiman's Divine Grace Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Goswami Maharaj Ki Ananti Gaudiya Vaishnavrinda Ki Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur Ki Prem se kaho Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Ki Shri Shri Radha Krishna Gopinath Shyamakunda Radhakunda Giri Govardhan Ki Vrindavan Dham Ki Navadip Mayapur Dham Ki Ganga Jamuna Maya Ki Tulasi Devi Maharani Ki Samaveda Bhakta Vrinda Ki Harinam Sankirtana Ki Brihat Madanga Ki. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to Shri Shri Guru and Gauranga. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Reading from the Srimad Bhagavatam, 10th Canto, 8th chapter, text number 30. Does anybody know the meter for this verse? There is no meter. Okay. So, let's see how we go. Okay. I'll read it and then we'll do the word for word. Is that what's being suggested? Okay. Hastagraye Rachayati vidham pita kulu haladayais chidram hyantar nihita vayuna sika bandeshu tadvit dvanta gare dritamani ganam svangam arta pradipam kale gop Yo yarhi griha kriteshu suvyagrachita. Okay. Hasta agraye. When the destination is out of the reach of his hands. Rachayati. He arranges to make. Vidhim. A means. Pithaka, by wooden planks piled together. Ulukala adyai, and by overturning the stone mortar for grinding spices. Chidram, a hole. He, indeed. Anta nihita, about the contents of the pot. Vayuna, with such knowledge. Sikya, hanging by a swing. Bandeshu, in the pots. Tatvit, expert in that knowledge, or in full knowledge. Dvanta agare, in a very dark room. Dhritamani ganam, because of being decorated with valuable jewels. Swa angam, his own body. Artapradipam is the light required for seeing in darkness. Kale, after that, in due course of time, Gopya, the elderly gopis, Yarhi, as soon as, Griha Krityeshu, in discharging household affairs, Suvyagrachita, are busily engaged. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami, Srila Prabhupada. When the milk and curd are kept high on a swing hanging from the ceiling, and Krishna and Balaram cannot reach it, they arrange to reach it by piling up various planks and turning upside down the mortar for grinding spices. Being quite aware of the contents of the pot, they pick holes in it. While the elderly gopis go about their household affairs, Krishna and Balaram sometimes go into a dark room, brightening the place with the valuable jewels and ornaments on their bodies and taking advantage of this light by stealing. We can say that responsibly so we can really kind of get more absorbed in this, meditate on this, what's being described here. When the milk and the curd are kept high on a swing, hanging from the ceiling, and Krishna and Balaram cannot reach it, they arrange to reach it by piling up various planks and turning upside down the mortar for grinding spices. Being quite aware of the contents of the pot, they pick holes in it. While the elderly gopis go about their household affairs, Krishna and Balaram sometimes go into a dark room, brightening the place with the valuable jewels and ornaments on their bodies, and taking advantage of this light by stealing. Srila Prabhupada's purport. Formerly, in every household, yogurt and butter were kept for use in emergencies. But Krishna and Balaram would pile up planks so that they could reach the pots and would then pick holes in the pots with their hands so that the contents would leak out and they could drink it. This was another means for stealing butter and milk. When the butter and milk were kept in a dark room, Krishna and Balaram would go there and make the place bright with the valuable jewels on their bodies. On the whole, Krishna and Balaram engaged in stealing butter and milk from the neighborhood houses in many ways. Om Ganatamanandasya Jananjana Shalakaya Chakshurun Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupakadamayam Darati Swapadantikam. So, I was informed shortly before class that there's a bit of a debate or controversy kind of going around as to whether these pastimes actually take place in the spiritual world. They take place in Goloka Vrindavan. We know they took place here on earth 5,000 years ago when Krishna was present, but are they taking place in the spiritual world? Because somebody found the statement, there's a letter that Prabhupada wrote to a Mataji named Ekayani, stating that Krishna's form in the spiritual world in Goloka Vrindavan was youth, 16 plus or minus, the appearance of a youth. And that was his form there. So if that's the case, how is it that these pastimes are going on in the spiritual world? But then there's been other things that devotees have said, well, like somebody such it, I think initially on the morning when this controversy broke out, I think Judah Karma gave class that morning. We were discussing outside, and he said, well, I heard that Putana, she got Vatsalya, liberation, which means as a nurse. So that's in Vatsalya Ras. So if she got there must be, if she got that liberation, Krishna must be there as a child. Otherwise, what's the purpose, of getting the Vatsalya Ras if there's going to be no Vatsalya Ras there? So, and back and forth. And there's, devotees are finding a couple statements that support one side or the other. So, how do we understand this? I'd like to suggest, so Archita approached me and he said, we're going to ask you some difficult question this morning. I don't know what he was talking about, but I guess he was referring to this. And I said, well, and he said, it would be nice to have a definitive answer. So I thought about that. I said, well, actually, I didn't think about it. My immediate response was, well, you're not going to get that from me. I'm not going to be able to. I didn't do any research on this, and I'm not going to be able to give you any definitive answer. And that was the end of the conversation. But then as I went off and continued chanting and thought about it, I said, well, maybe I could contribute something to the understanding. And I'd like to suggest that it's, and once again, this is a, I guess what you call philosophical speculation. I do have a little bit of a Shastric support for it, but anyway, I'll make my case, and then everybody could decide its relative merit. I like to suggest that it's both. That Krishna, as Prabhupada said in that letter to Ekayani, has that form. He's the youthful appearance. That's his form in Goloka Vrindavan. But simultaneously, he can be experienced in all these other ways. And now, of course, in the material world, that's absolutely impossible. In the material world, you can look like Sravas, or you could look like Archita. You can't look like Sravas and Archita at the same time. There's not going to be a morning when Sravas gets up, looks at himself in the mirror and sees Archita, or vice versa, unless one of the two of them goes stark raving mad, right? So that's just the way it is, you see? But, that's in matter. And perhaps in spirit, it's, that same doesn't hold. The example I'd like to give is, I couldn't actually find the passage, unfortunately, but there's that part in the Krishna book where Krishna and Balaram are entering into the wrestling arena, and all the different people who are attending there, they, according to their, how would you say it, their existential position, they saw him in a different way. The yogis saw him as the super soul in the heart. The fools saw him as an incompetent person. Can somebody help? The devotees can help me out. What is some more? You know what I'm talking about, that passage? Huh? Can you think of some more examples? The ladies saw him as very beautiful and handsome. There were more. There were about a half a dozen at least. Yeah, Kamsa saw him as death personified. Mother Yasoda saw him as a little child, and on and on. I don't know how many there were. But now they were all seeing the same person. They're all seeing the same person. But because of their mentality, they at least they were responding to what they were seeing in a totally different way. So I'm suggesting that in the spiritual world, you got to think outside. Anyway, in the spiritual, maybe it's like even a further progression on that principle, which is that, due to the intensities of love that are experienced by the different devotees there, Krishna's there in that, as Prabhupada said, in that youthful form, but due to their, service attitude, the rasa, they're experiencing Krishna in that different way. And all these pastimes are going on like that. Once again, this is like, I would say a philosophical speculation. I felt like I had a little bit of Shastric support for it, but I'm not, as I started off by saying, I'm not trying to present what I think is the definitive answer, just trying to add something. And you could say, well, wait a second, that's totally like off the wall, but in Krishna consciousness, you really have to be prepared to think not just outside the box, but outside the box. And what does that mean? Well, we know what it means to think outside the box, right? Here's a box, all right? And outside the box is here. That's everything. Here's the box, okay? So if you're thinking outside the box, but what's outside the box? Huh? Correct. Here's the box. This is outside the box. What's outside the box is inside the box. So you're back in the box again. So, you know what I mean? It's a paradox. So Krishna consciousness is like that. It's inconceivable. And there's that famous story where Giriraj Maharaj tells the story, because he was actually personally present. Yamuna, Devi Dasi, her grace, and I think it was Madhavisa. It was either Madhavisa or Tamal Krishna Maharaj, I can't remember for sure. But they were having an argument, a discussion, whatever you call it, what you want. And Madhavisa was making the point that there's no difference between Krishna and Balaram except for their color. You know, Balaram is white, Krishna is bluish. And Mother Yamuna was saying, no. In the Nectar of Devotion, it's explained that, Krishna has certain qualities that Balaram doesn't have. He engages in past, I can't remember which one it was, but, there is a difference. And they were going back and forth. And Giriraj Maharaj was overhearing this, and he was thinking, well, they both seem to be making good arguments and supporting their point with Shastric references, so who's right? So it was Tamal Krishna Maharaj, okay, yeah. So then when he had the opportunity, Giriraj Maharaj was with Prabhupada, and he asked Prabhupada, he presented the whole thing. He said, Srila Prabhupada, I was overhearing this discussion between Yamuna and Tamal Krishna Maharaj about if, Krishna and Balaram. Oh, he's the one who overheard. And Giriraj Maharaj maybe overheard him. Okay. He happened to be there when Tamal Krishna Maharaj was. Well, how does Giriraj Maharaj fit into the whole thing? He just heard about it. Okay, so Tamal Krishna Maharaj went to Prabhupada, and he presented the whole thing that, Madhavisa is saying this, and Yamuna is saying this, and they're both supporting what they're saying with Shastric evidence. So he did it a little bit more dramatically. He says, Yamuna says this, that there's no, that Madhavisa is saying there's no difference between Krishna and Balaram except for the color. And Prabhupada says, yes, he's right. Tamal Krishna goes, okay. But Yamuna is saying that there is a difference, because in the Nectar Devotion it says da-da-da-da-da, and, she's got the reference, and Prabhupada says, well, she's right. And then Tamal Krishna Maharaj goes, well, they both can't be right. And Prabhupada goes, well, you're right. You see? And then he goes, well, who's right? And he says, well, that's for you to figure out. See, so certain things are inconceivable. I mean, we're thinking in terms of matter. You can't think in terms of matter, perhaps, is what I'm suggesting, when you're thinking about the pastimes of the Lord, which are, really inconceivable. I mean, you can say, well, that's a cop-out. Well, it's not a cop-out. Because Jiva Goswami says, that one of the first criteria, one of the first qualifications for being able to embark upon the journey of devotional services, you have to accept that the Lord has a Chincha Shakti, inconceivable potencies. We're not dealing with something that operates according to the laws of physics or something like that here. It's way beyond that. So that's as I said, that was my contribution, that possibly it's both at the same time, that Krishna does appear in that, Navayovanam, the youthful form, but simultaneously, due to transformations of consciousness, the inhabitants there are experiencing all the different, aspects of all the different rasas, even though Krishna's there like that. So, on that point. And I'll maybe, after the class, I'll leave time for questions and discussion, and that if devotees want to say something on that point, we could do it at that point, at that time. So getting back to today's verse, So, yeah, in reading these verses, I was just kind of reflecting on, you know, the situation of these devotees. You know, the Mother Yasoda, Nanda Maharaj, and you know, the Gopas and the Gopis. You know, the elderly Gopis, and you know, how is it that they're in this privileged position? And actually, Maharaj Prickett, a little later on in this chapter, he raises the same question. You know, he's thinking like that too, and he actually inquires from Sukadeva Goswami. The verse goes, I'll just read the translation. Having heard of the good fortune of Mother Yasoda, Parikshit Maharaj inquired from Sukadeva Goswami, O learned Brahmana, Mother Yasoda's breast milk was sucked by the Supreme Personality of Godhead. What auspicious activities did she and Nanda Maharaj perform to achieve such perfection in ecstatic love? So he's wondering like that, you know, how is it that possible that, you know, these two personalities have been able to, you know, are elevated to this position of, you know, being Krishna's mother and having Krishna suck her breast milk, and, you know, Nanda Maharaj be the father. So then there's some, you know, discussion, but then in the next chapter, 9th chapter, Sukadeva Goswami kind of gets around to answering the question. And this is Sukadeva Goswami speaking now. He says in chapter 9, text 21, he says, the Supreme Personality of Godhead Krishna, the son of Mother Yasoda, is accessible to devotees engaged in spontaneous loving service. He is not as easily accessible to mental speculators, those striving for self-realization by severe austerities and penances, or those who consider the body the same as the self. So, yeah, so there's a few, you know, important points made there that basically Maharaj Prickett is getting the answer to his question here a little later on, and by Sukadeva Goswami, that how is it that they, you know, became that fortunate? Well, ultimately it's because of, you know, they were engaged in spontaneous loving service, right? That's their, that's the final perfection, you know. But leading up to that, there is something, this background story, this background activity, and that's described a little still further on here in this 10th canto. There's a very famous verse. I think it's, I'm not sure who's speaking actually, who's the person speaking of this verse. Maybe it's Sukadeva Goswami, but it goes, Itam satam brahma sukhanubhuja tashyam gatanam paradaivatena mayashritanam naradarakena sakam vijaru krita punja punja. Does anybody know who is? That's Sukadeva Goswami speaking? Sorry? It is. Sukadeva Goswami speaking. Yeah. So he says, the translation for that is, those who are engaged in self-realization, appreciating the Brahman effulgence of the Lord, and those engaged in devotional service, accepting the Supreme Personality of Godhead as Master, as well as those who are under the clutches of Maya, thinking the Lord an ordinary person, cannot understand, and before I read what they can't understand, bear in mind, he's actually saying here that even those engaged in devotional service, accepting the Supreme Personality of God as Master, cannot understand this. We're even talking about, you know, devotees now. It says they can't, they can't understand that certain exalted personalities, after accumulating volumes of pious activities, are now playing with the Lord in friendship as cowherd boys. See? So, you know, we have to appreciate who we're hearing about. We're hearing about personalities who have accumulated volumes of pious activities, you know, in order to krita punja punja, in order to be in this position of then, from there, that's like a springboard, you know, like when you're going to, you know, everybody knows what that idea of a springboard. So the volumes of pious activities are the springboard for them to have the opportunity to enter onto the platform of spontaneous loving service. And then, as a result of engaging in spontaneous loving service, they're able to enter into these types of relationships with Krishna. And then also in that verse, the previous verse by Sukadeva Goswami, when he talks about who isn't eligible. So that's who's eligible. Who's eligible is personalities who have engaged in, who have accumulated volumes of pious activities, maybe over many, many births, right? And then who went on from there to engage in spontaneous devotional service. They're the ones who are eligible to have access to Krishna and these rasas. And who's not eligible is, as mentioned here in the verse, mental speculators. And as far as mental speculators go, there's a very nice verse from earlier on in this chapter, in this canto, where the demigods make a nice statement about this. Yene ravandaksha vamuktamaninas tvayasata babad avashuddha buddhaya aruya krichchena padam tata patanti ado nadvidata yusmat angriha. Translation is, this is the demigod speaking. O lotus-eyed Lord, although non-devotees who accept severe austerities and penances to achieve the highest... Sorry, read the wrong one. This is the one for the mental speculators. This is from the prayers of Lord Brahma. Shreyas Shritim Bhaktim Udashyate Vibho Klishyantiye Kevala Bodha Labdaye Tesham Aso Klesala Eva Sishyate Nanyad Yata Stula Tushavatinam. My dear Lord, devotional service unto you is the best path for self-realization. If someone gives up that path and engages in the cultivation of speculative knowledge, and this is Lord Brahma's understanding of it, he says, he will simply undergo a troublesome process and will not achieve the desired result. A person who beats an empty husk of wheat cannot get grain. One who simply speculates cannot achieve self-realization. His only gain is trouble. So that's the conclusion of Lord Brahma about the mental speculators. And as far as those who are performing the severe penances and austerities mentioned here, those who are striving for self-realization by severe penances and austerities, according to the demigods, it says here, although non-devotees who accept severe austerities and penances to achieve the highest position may think themselves liberated, their intelligence is impure. They fall down from their position of imagined superiority because they have no regard for your lotus feet. So in other words, it's also not a program that's going to be successful. And it's interesting that phrase, imagined superiority. It's not even a real superior position, factual. It's just a mental concoction, and they fall down from it anyway. So, and then what to speak of those who consider the body the same as the self? They're understood as to be no better than. Let's see, where's that verse? I think this is Krishna himself speaking. Correct me if I'm wrong. They're understood to be no better than cows or asses. The people who are identifying the body as the self. Yasyatma Buddhe Kunape Chuda. Krishna speaking to the gopis? Right. Yasyatma Buddhe Kunape Tridatuke Swadi Kala Tradisu Boma Ijidi Yatirtha Buddhe Salile Nakarichit Janeshu Abigeshu Saeva Gokara. One who identifies his self as the inert body composed of mucus, bile, and air, who assumes his wife and family are permanently his own, and who thinks an earthen image or the land of his birth is worshipable, or who sees a place of pilgrimage as merely the water there, but who never identifies himself with, feels kinship with, worships, or even visits those who are wise in spiritual truth, such a person is no better than a cow or an ass. So that's Krishna opinion about those who are identifying the body as the self. So, yeah, we always have to be mindful of, the exalted position of the personalities that we're hearing about in this 10th canto. And so much so that, sometimes they're in another category. There's one, I'll one more really nice verse by a devotee named Bhrgupati Prabhu, just to give an idea of the elevated consciousness of, these personalities in this category. He goes, Shrutim apare smritim itare bharatam anye bhajantu bhavabhita aham iha nandam bande yasyalinde param brahma. So this is Bhrgupati Prabhu, and he says, those who are afraid of material existence worship Vedic literature. Some worship Smriti, the corollaries to Vedic literature, and others worship the Mahabharata. As far as I am concerned, I worship Maharaj Nanda, the father of Krishna, in whose courtyard the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the Absolute Truth, is playing. So basically the point he's making there that this is such elevated subject matter that it just it supersedes, all these preliminary understandings. He's not worried. He's just basically saying, I'll just worship Nanda Maharaj. That'll be good enough for me. I'm not going to worry about, worshiping the Vedic literatures and all these different forms. So it's a very, very elevated position. And so something we can aspire to. And bringing it all back home here, back down to earth, probably one of the most practical ways in which we can, which I didn't print out, but aspire for this is that verse. So I think it's the gopis actually are speaking to Krishna, and it's the gopis speaking to Krishna, and they go. Probably you can help me with this. Tavakatamritam tapta jivanam. How's it go? Right. Keep. Right. So the gopis there are saying that actually those who spread these messages about yourself and your pastimes, they're the most greatest welfare workers, in the world. And so that's the process. We're hearing about some very exalted subject matter here, but and we're hearing about how, prior to being in these positions, one has to engage in, accumulate volumes of pious activities, and then one becomes eligible to enter into the platform of spontaneous devotional service. But, they say the journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. So that's the single step, Just taking that advice of the gopis and becoming, field workers, participating in this activity of broadcasting the glories of Krishna, which is what we're doing this month, and all year round, of course, but particularly this month we're trying to, really broadcast the glories of Krishna, and that's the, that's our, the way in which we can try to follow in their footsteps and, progress towards eventually being on these, same sort of platform ourselves. So I'll stop there. Does anybody have any questions or comments? Archidabhu, yeah.
Hare Krishna. Thank you for a nice class. That verse, Krita Punya Punya, I just wanted to comment on that because especially the newer devotees may not understand. It's stating there that these devotees in Vrindavan, they have their position because of heaps of pious activities. But we know from the scripture that there are actually 3 classes of devotees involved there. There are those who came from the spiritual world with Krishna, so there's no question of them accumulating heaps of pious activities. They always were with Krishna, always engaged in serving Krishna. Then there are the demigods who come, participate in the pastime, and then they go back to their posts. And then there are those who are being promoted from the material platform. They take birth in Bhoma Vrindavan, get experience with Krishna, and then they go back to the spiritual world. So Just to be clear, that it's not that everybody has to accumulate heaps of pious activities. Some of them never left the spiritual world. They come with Krishna, they go back with Krishna. So there's no question of accumulating heaps of pious activities. They're just always engaged in Krishna service.
Yeah,
so just
and if I'm not mistaken, if you can, somebody could help me with this. I think there's a place in the Chaitanya Charitamrita where there's a distinction made between pious activities that elevate one materially and pious activities that help one progress further towards devotional service. Because generally, the general understanding of as a result of pious activities, you achieve, more material opulence and prosperity and so forth and so on. What's the connection? But there is some verse, some place in the Chaitanya Charitamrita where it's explained that there are pious activities which actually help you move closer to, devotional service, and they're like another category, perhaps.
And this begs the question to the no-fall camp, those who say that you can't fall from the spiritual world. If you're always in the material world, according to them, then you get a chance to go back to the spiritual world, and now you've gone back. So can you say then everybody in the spiritual world never fell, but that person was previously in the material world? You see the point I'm making?
No, say it again.
If you're in the material world, always, according to them, you're always here,
right.
Then you get a chance to go back to the spiritual, go to the spiritual world. So now you're there. You've perfected yourself, you're in the spiritual world. How do you say then that nobody can fall? You see what I'm saying? Because that person was once in the material world. They were once here. Do they walk around with an X on their forehead saying that I was once in the material world? You know what I'm saying? Everybody in the spiritual world is perfect. So if you were once in the material world and now you go back to you go to the spiritual world for the first time, according to them, because you were always here first. Now you go to the spiritual world. Do you walk around with an X on your forehead saying that I was once in the material world?
No.
So how do you distinguish between those who were in the material world at one point and are now in the spiritual world, and those that were always there? How do you make any distinction?
You can't.
You can't. That's the whole point. Perfect is perfect. Prabhupada said, whether it's Nitya Siddha, Sadhan Siddha, or Kripa Siddha, perfect is perfect.
Okay. Anybody else? Anything? Okay.
This regarding the confusion that you started your class with, whether Krishna is only 16-year-old in the spiritual world. What I think is, when Krishna is 16-year-old, that time all the 5 rasas are completely activated. That's the right statement. So I have read this in Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, because when Krishna is just born, there is only Vatsalya rasa, there is no question of Madhurya rasa, and there is no question of Sakhya rasa, because Krishna is always with his mother or with elderly gopis. So when Krishna is 16 years old, that time all the 5 rasas are full-fledged and completely active. And when Krishna was here in this planet, and he married 16,100 queens, that time when Narad Muni visited Dwarka, he saw Krishna had different form in different palaces with the queens, and Krishna's form was not same. Wherever the gopi or the wife was old, Krishna was old too. When it is said that Krishna, wherever the wife was short, Krishna was short. According to he kind of managed himself according to the size of the body of the wife. So wherever Krishna had different type of wife, he had different forms. So if Krishna can have different forms in Dwarka, why can't he have different forms in spiritual world?
Okay. I'm not going to comment. I'm just going to leave it as Prabhu. Okay.
Thank you, Prabhu, for, as always, wonderful class. So I have 3 points. One is that, whether I am 6, 16, or 60, I never grow up for my mom. She always knows better. So the Vatsalya Ras is not dependent on the age. The second point, there's a definite example about this with the pastime of Nityananda Prabhu with Mother Malini, Srivasacharya's wife, right? That obviously, even though she was an elderly lady, had Vatsalya Ras. The third point is that aside from Srila Prabhupada's letter that you mentioned, a recent Archita Prabhu, Bhaktivinoda Thakur in Jaiva Dharma, he explains on this for like 2 pages maybe. That I don't know if you read that or not, but it basically says that because the Goloka is more subtle than Gokula, in order for the Vatsalya Ras to manifest, Krishna does not have to grossly take birth and grossly be a kid. The rasa is present even though Krishna is Yugala Kishore.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Savasvu.
Yeah, I think I just read this morning from the 3rd canto, 28th chapter, that Prabhupada said in the purport that Krishna takes the form of that the pure devotee wants to worship him in. And Prabhupada said there's millions of those kind of forms. So if the pure devotee wants to serve Krishna as Radha and Krishna, he's there. As Sita Ram, he's there. As Lord Nrsimha, he's there. So the main point is that, but he's always the same Krishna, never changes. He just takes on a different form to satisfy his pure devotee. And that can be millions and millions of unlimited forms.
Thank you. Anybody else? Okay, thank you very much. Kantarot Srimad Bhagavatam Ki Jai, Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai.